Dr. Alley, I am so excited to talk to you today. I know you have spoken all over the country about leadership, about setting an environment for ABA business owners, for their staff that allows success for the clients that they work with, that allows the employees to feel empowered and successful in their positions. And we're going to dig into that today. And we're going to talk about how business owners who may feel completely frazzled and at their wits' end can turn their company around. Yeah. And it's actually quite exciting, I think.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Erica. I'm really excited to be with you today and to talk about all this stuff. Super passionate about it, and through direct lived experience, I feel it's really important and not talked about in our field.
Absolutely. And I think, too, leadership has kind of become a buzzword, but like practically, what does it mean? How do you create the environment? Just being a good leader doesn't mean I say I'm a good leader. What are the actual actions that I need to take? What are the systems I need to have in place? So yeah, we're going to dig into it.
Sure. Great.
So I know you talk a lot about resilient leadership. And in our field right now, there are so many owners. A lot are clinical owners who I think feel completely burned out. Like they've just hit a wall. They're managing payroll. They're managing their clinicians, the clinical product of their company, all of the administrative burden. How can these leaders create an environment of operational resilience? And what is operational resilience?
Great question. So I think the first thing to note is that leadership is not values posters all over the walls inside of your clinic.
For sure.
And so the very first thing that we really like to work with people about is, what are your values? Why are you doing this? And the thing that we say all the time is, you're taking 100% of the risk here. So why are you doing this? And if you can't answer that first why question, that's the very first place to start. When you know your why, then you can have your mission, your vision, and your values strong in your organization. And that's really where it starts, is saying, here's where this decision is being made, and it aligns with this value, or it aligns with this mission. And if there's not that connectability to your why, to living your values in action, then you're not leading. So I like to say that leadership is values in action. It's a verb. You are actively doing it day in and day out.
And would you say that then makes you feel like maybe you're in a little tugboat out in the middle of the ocean, just being washed in whatever direction by waves because you're not tying anything?
Yes. That's the problem, too. The strategic planning is another big issue as well. People will say, well, I want to do this and I want to achieve this outcome in 3 years. But then the decisions that they're making every single day have nothing to do with those initiatives, or they directly are misaligned with their values. And it doesn't come from a place of ill intent. Everyone starts an ABA company because they want to do the right thing. BCBAs and RBTs go to school because they want to do the right thing. They want to help. But if their actions aren't directly tied to the outcomes of the organization, that is where leadership fails right from the get-go.
And I think that's such an important point that I would say seems so easy to gloss over.
I cannot tell you how many times we work with people who have been, in their company for 5 years, and we say, why are you doing this? And there's that general statement of, well, I want to help people, or I have a personal connection with somebody who has autism spectrum disorder or a developmental disability. And then we say, okay, well, what are your vision or your mission and your vision and your values? And they have these 5 buzzwords like accountability, honesty, whatever those are. But it's like, well, what do you do every day that, 1, leads that into your organization, and 2, is visible to your employees so that they know that you are leading with intent? Because people who are good leaders and are leading with intent, directly tied to the vision of their company, will have people that will follow them because they feel that they are really directly involved with filling out those values for the company. So when people say, I'm doing this for accountability, is one of my phrases that I use in my company. We will say, accountability to what? And then that starts the conversation. Accountability to your clients, accountability to the insurance companies, accountability to who? Who are you thinking about? Who is your target audience? So I think really that time to develop that is so critical and so overlooked. So if people aren't doing that up front, then they don't know what type of values they're looking for in their employees, and they also don't know what kind of leadership behaviors they should reinforce in their organizations. So as far as what is the definition of this operational or resilient leadership, It is essentially being able to produce leaders who can lead your organization so that the business owner can run their company and they're not doing payroll and cleaning the toilets and ordering supplies off of Amazon, that they have a strong team who knows how those missions directly tie to the work that they do every single day. And that they can do it despite the persistence of discomfort or in the persistence of discomfort. So lots of people don't know how to have a difficult conversation. They don't know how to hold a staff member accountable. They can't tell a family, hey, your attendance is very low. We need to talk about outcomes for your child. And that stuff gets pushed off to the business owner who is already trying to do 15 other things, which directly ties back to the burnout that you were talking about. But again, leadership is a certain set of behaviors that are nowhere on the BACB task list.
Right.
That is a whole separate set of skills that people need to learn. And how do we learn? We learn through modeling and repetition. And so if that's not happening at the organization, there's no opportunity for them to become leaders. And then the people who want them to be leaders are resentful that they can't lead. And then it just becomes this really difficult situation and spiral to get out of.
So, as a clinician who's also running a company, you need to think about not only the clients that you're serving need behavior plans, skill acquisition target goals, behavior reduction target goals, but your employees do as well.
Absolutely.
It needs to be intentional.
Yes, and intentional was the word that just came to mind, as well as when you're hiring someone, you have to be intentional about who you're hiring. And some of the best employees that we ever had no ABA background, but you know what they had? Grit and resilience. And so that's what started me thinking about, what is this resilience that keeps coming up? How do these leaders really start leading organizations with resilience? And so I started really diving into this to see what is resilience, and I started looking outside of the ABA field, which is another area that I think we should be doing in this industry.
Yes.
We're a young industry. And so when I hear people primarily on social media saying, I'm so burned out. I'm in this field. I've been doing this for 5 years. I'm disillusioned. This is not what I signed up for. And then these people are talking through the threads on Facebook or Instagram, and they're all saying the same thing, but nobody is saying, how do we get out of this?
Right.
So I start thinking, okay, I understand we have a difficult job, 100%. I've lived it. I'm still an active BCBA. I still provide clinical services. But something tells me that an emergency room trauma surgeon probably is pretty stressed too. And first responders, police officers, what are they doing to train their workforce that is directly assessing burnout? And so when we really start to look into that, we see that leadership is directly taught in med school. I've been doing a lot of work looking into how are physicians trained to do this job? What education do they receive that we don't receive, and how can we take what they're doing well and embed it into our education and training, whether that's through individual mentorship, through fieldwork experiences, whatever that looks like. And so what's coming up time and time again is the inability to lead teams. And so if you think about the structure, an RBT is being led by a BCBA. The BCBA may have their certification, whether they've been certified for 1 minute or 10 years, if they've never been directly trained on how to lead a team, how can they do their job, right? So we're asking them to do something, but not giving them the tools to do it. So then this secondary component that I'm very, very interested in and that I'm really looking to develop is this concept that I'm calling resilient leadership. And I know that that is kind of an overarching statement. I know resilient leadership is, doesn't really define what I'm doing, but what I'm looking at is, what does the behavioral lens of leadership look like? And what I have found through this experience of going down and looking at all these different things is that nobody is addressing trauma in the workforce. We have done a great job in the field looking at trauma for the clients that we serve. So when I was looking at the psychological literature and research, there's a wonderful book by someone known as Jonathan Haidt, who wrote a book called The Anxious Generation. And I read that just from personal experience and having a daughter with some mental health issues and trying to understand, why can't she talk to me when she's stressed out? Why do I get these random text messages that make no sense? And why are all the communications coming through text? And what that actually taught me is that our entire workforce is in this anxious generation. And so what that has told me over the period of this investigation is most of our workforce is under the age of 30. And again, I don't want to make any blanket overgeneralizations here, but if we look at BACB certificate data from both BCBAs, BCABAs, RBTs, even BCBA-Ds, most of our workforce is under the age of 40. Primarily actually under 26, but 40 and under is pretty much where we're at. And so the way that the author in this book explains things is that after 1998, the way that we actually were conditioned to communicate with others and the way that our brains have developed have been behind screens. So if we think about that for just a minute, right? Going back to that difficult conversation, why can't that BCBA just tell that RBT that their data collection is wrong? Where does that come from? Why can't they have that difficult conversation? Because their brains are wired differently than my brain and your brain. We were given that direct opportunity to have trial and error through play, through discussion, critical feedback. We didn't have an iPhone or a tablet in front of us and learn to communicate through threads and chat messages. We didn't have that algorithm that was hitting the dopamine in our brain with the likes that we're getting, or so-and-so responded. So that is the resilient leadership piece, is really looking at the trauma in the workforce and addressing the trauma in the way that we are training leaders for organizations. And so the trauma piece is essentially respondent behavior. So looking at respondent behavior through establishing operations and seeing physically why can't they have that difficult conversation. It's not an inherent character flaw. It is respondent behavior that we know through behavior analysis. We can train.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And one step further, which I know we'll talk about in a little bit as well, this sheds incredible light on why is turnover such a problem? Because we're not addressing or creating an environment that is conducive to keep people. So,
Right. How many people do you personally know who own ABA companies or just, colleagues in the field where they've had to have a difficult conversation with a staff member? They have the conversation, and then within 24 hours, there's a resignation email, quit without notice. That is the immediate default. So where does that come from? And again, that goes right back to that respondent behavior. There are very strong respondent operant behavior interactions that are directly related to the workforce that we are training, the workforce that we need to lead, and the workforce that need these skills to do their job well. And so it's so much more than just writing that treatment plan or doing behavioral skills training with an RBT to teach them a new skill set. If they don't have the skills, and more importantly, they haven't developed the skills through their brain development, and we are completely overlooking respondent behavior as an establishing operation here, we're missing the mark. It doesn't matter if we had the most amazing people come in from the highest organizations to provide the best leadership training. If we are not directly assessing the respondent-operant relationship, all of that is a waste. And so that is what I'm really interested in, really encouraging people to look into. And how we do that is by looking at something called the ACEs study. Are you familiar with the ACEs study? Okay. So the ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And this was a study that was done years and years ago by Folletti et al. And they looked at what are the types of adverse childhood experiences that impact future health. So what leads to diabetes? What leads to depression? And what they found is that there are very, very high rates of adverse childhood experiences, primarily, again, also that coincides with the after 1998, that these types of things that happen in childhood directly relate to our health outcomes long term. And I don't want to misquote the percentage, but I want to say it was roughly 67% of people surveyed had 3 or more adverse childhood experiences. And that was when that study was conducted. So if we look at what 2026 looks like, and we know that 1998 is when happened when the whole brain rewiring changed, I would assume that we're going to have even higher numbers than that. So I like to look at how can we look at that adverse childhood experience survey, the ACEs survey. How do we use that in the work that we're doing with our RBTs, BCBAs, and then how do we shift our leadership perspectives and behaviors to be mindful of that and to make sure that we're addressing trauma with them? Because if we can address the trauma with them, they can do good work with the clients that we serve.
Right. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about, you were talking about how with our this generation that's come up, and which is most of our field, being raised or very used to screens. And so their experience with face-to-face, their experience with difficult conversations, and all of these things have been missing. So there are gaps in skills. It makes me also think about the perspective of, okay, how does that impact the need for reinforcement then when you're teaching those skills? So from that perspective, are we making assumptions as a field when we're teaching these skills on how quickly they should learn them, how much reinforcement they need? Are we even being intentional with the reinforcement schedule we're using?
Yeah.
And does that impact this bigger conversation?
Yeah, those are all excellent questions. And I think what I'd like to really bring it back to is it doesn't matter what the rate of reinforcement is. It doesn't matter the opportunity to learn if they physically can't do it. So let me walk you through a practical example. Let's say a BCBA who has these adverse childhood experiences and who has experienced trauma in their life is now expected to give an annual review to an RBT. And the RBT has performed poorly over the course of the year. Well, first of all, they shouldn't wait 1 year to give feedback, but that's a whole other story. So they know that they have to go and give this really difficult feedback and maybe even put them on a performance improvement plan. And they know that this is their job. They have to do this. It was in their job description. They've received zero training, zero mentorship, zero support. They're not going to feel comfortable going to their boss and saying, I don't know how to do this.
For sure.
No one's going to say that.
Right.
Unless you build a really strong culture of psychological flexibility. They're not going to ask for help. They're not going to advocate for help. And so they are going to avoid and escape doing that. Or they're going to do it, but they're not going to do it well. Or they're going to be asked a question that they don't have the answer to, and they're going to give a response like, I don't know, I was just told I have to do this. Right? And that is not the leadership that we want for this field and where we want our field to be in 20 years. So it might be that we could give reinforcement for every successful job annual review that they do. But if they physically can't show up to the table because they have a racing heart, they're vomiting in the bathroom because they're so stressed.
So what's the solution for that?
You have to use ACT principles, and we are directly training these behaviors. So what I've done with the resilient leadership is I'm looking at performance management, ACT, trauma, and then developing a curriculum where we're directly teaching that. So the very first thing would be having them tact a private event. So we're going to sit here and I'm going to give you difficult feedback, and we're going to do it for 10 seconds.
So you're talking about within the company, intentional leadership training, where the leadership training is taking the future leaders through ACT so that then they are capable of creating the environment and taking their, I don't want to say subordinates, but the employees that they are responsible for through the same process.
Yes. So I'm saying it requires deliberate training, just like we would do with discrete trial teaching, right? The opportunities have to be there and the repetition has to be there.
So this completely revamps ABA business owner operations. You know.
Yeah. Yes.
So how can this be implemented into that's a big question.
It is. And so what I would expect anyone listening to this to say is, great, I already don't have any time in my schedule. Now you're telling me I have to train a whole team of people on this. I don't have time for that, and I don't have the money for that. Now that's also going to impact billable hours, and who's going to pay for that, right?
Right.
So what I would hope is that people would realize, when I say people, I mean like a BCBA, would have that knowledge of, oh no, I don't have this skill. I know I'm going to be asked to lead a team. I need to go seek this knowledge.
Yes.
Now, I know that that's probably maybe 15% of the workforce would be self-aware and they would actually do that, right? But for a business owner, knowing that they want to build this culture of psychological flexibility and they want to address the trauma in the workforce mindfully, they could have their own leadership curriculum that happens where they use almost a train-the-trainer model. They could do training modules that is delivered on a learning management system, but it will require the face-to-face role-play interaction. There has to be mastery criteria, and then more importantly, there has to be generalization to real-life context. Because it doesn't matter if you master something in a role-play situation.
Right.
If you can't really do it where it matters, then that's all been wasted effort. So the cost of it would be probably what I would expect most people to say, why should I bear the burden of this? Why should I be the one that has to take this on? Well, the question that I would ask is, do you want to continue doing all of this yourself, or do you want to build a strong, resilient team under you?
There's a cost on both sides. You can't ignore one cost and focus on the other. That's right.
Right, and you can't want your team to do something, not give them the tools to do it well, and then resent them for not doing it. That doesn't work. That whole culture, that's a toxic culture. So most states have amazing state and federal workforce opportunity or workforce development grants. And I reached out to somebody in the West Palm Beach area and was talking about, like, how can we get more money into these ABA companies? And the person who I spoke with said, what is an RBT? What's a BCBA?
Wow.
These people had never even heard of our industry. So I think that would be an area that would be great for state ABA associations to start doing, where they're making these connections with all of these workforce development grants and saying, this is our industry. We need more training. We need more support with training, maybe even job site training opportunities. So it's not one company having to shell out all this money, because the company then has to consider what's the return on investment. What if they spend all that money training this amazing leader, and that leader then leaves in 6 months and goes and works for another company and now takes all of that knowledge with them? So there has to be...
It's good for our field.
It's great for our field. Yes, it's great for our field, but they also have to consider the time, the money, the return on the investment. So that would be how I would say that the best approach would be. But again, nobody really is talking about that. There is no curriculum for that, which is why I'm so passionate about developing this so that we can get this out there. Because I would say 95% of the people that we work with, this is a common thread or a common theme in their company is, my leaders can't lead. I have to do it all.
Yeah.
I'm burned out. I don't want to do this anymore.
Right. Yeah, that lack of skill is there, but even before that, the lack of the ability to learn the skill. So I can see how that would transform a company.
I'm terrified of heights. And you could not pay me $15 million to skydive. You're not throwing me out of an airplane. I don't care what's happening. You could have a gun to my head and I am not jumping out of an airplane. That is the same type of response that people are experiencing internally when we're telling them to go give that difficult feedback to the RBT. It's the same respondent fight or flight response that we would feel being thrown out of an airplane or whatever people's biggest fear is. So again, just looking at it from that perspective, I know that's a really dramatic example, but the physiological reaction in our body is the same. Whether it's getting on an airplane, going for a job interview, having a conversation with your boss, telling them, I don't know what I'm doing, help me. All those things have to be looked at first. And the very first thing you have to do is again, be willing to talk about it. Be willing to say, I want you to fill out this ACEs survey, confidentially, of course. I want my values in the company to be directly related to upholding the ACEs and being aware of that and mindful of trauma in the workforce, and then developing a system for training that and continuing that growth in the company.
At what point, or is there a point, where we say, this is a fit with a position?
Right. So I'm glad you asked that. I would suggest that this is the training that your senior leadership team or your management team would have, not the RBTs. So what I mean by that is a senior BCBA, a clinical director. And so when I use the phrase clinical director, I mean a true clinical director, somebody who is overseeing the work of a team of BCBAs, assessing quality in the organization, developing clinical standards and outcome measures, not somebody who's been a BCBA with a full caseload overseeing clients that has a clinical director title. So I think that that's another important distinction as well. But I would say clinical director level employees or senior BCBAs with the people that you want to lead your company if you're that CEO, so that you can then have your time focused on the strategic initiatives that really require your time and effort.
Right. Yeah. Are there different types of leadership capabilities? Like if you're thinking about an ABA company and you're looking at assessing someone coming in that you're hiring for a position, would you be able to look at them and say, oh, you have this type of leadership, or you would be good in this kind of role?
Yeah. I think that's really a difficult thing to answer because when you're interviewing somebody, they are presenting very well to you. They're on their best behavior. And I've always said you don't know what somebody can do until you've been working with them for about 6 months. You really don't know what you're getting. The work that we do is so multifaceted that you really cannot assess what you are getting until you've seen them in the job. So I would say what you could do is you could present a scenario in a job interview. This is what I need you to do. How are you going to do it? And then just stop talking and see, what do they say? What does their body language look like? Are you seeing any of that respondent behavior? Are they saying, I don't know, I've never done that before? And then asking, what is your opportunity for feedback coaching, and would you be willing to be mentored through leadership? How do you receive feedback? Is there anything that we need to know about your ability to lead teams? And then when you're doing your reference checks, which I hope people are still doing these days, that they're directly asking a series of questions about leadership. And I think that the true measure of a leader is when people are visible and that they are, again, they have their values in action every single day, and their teams are following them because they recognize their value, not because they have to follow them or they want to follow them, because they know it's the right thing to do and they feel safe in their experiences with them and their opportunities to be with them.
So for the BCBA clinician owner listening, what would be the path? What are the next steps that you would recommend that they take to be able to put some of these things in place to create their leaders, to create the path for their organization to be more resilient?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the very first thing would be, do they have a strong mission, vision, and values statement? And what are and defining the specific behaviors that demonstrate those values in action every single day? So that if I walk into your company, I can feel those behaviors and those actions happening in real time. So that's the first thing, and that should be really easy for a clinician to operationally define the behaviors. So as I mentioned before, when we talk about accountability, well, what does that mean specifically? And so we can use behavioral definitions to define the specific set or behavioral response class of behaviors within that we want to see. That's the first thing, because you need to know what are the specific things that you need your team to do, and maybe even self-reflecting on what do I do every single day to lead my teams well, and what do I want to replicate in my staff? And if I could take this one thing and not have to do it anymore, how valuable would that be for me? Right? So we want ABA business owners to really look at the strategic growth of their company and not be wearing 27 hats every single day.
Right.
Because we have a lot of really great people doing really great work, and they're burning out and they're leaving the field, and it's heartbreaking. So I would say first, start by defining those three things, looking at yourself and defining what are you doing, and then saying these are the skills that I want to replicate in someone else.
So there's an expense tied to this training. How, as an owner, can I look at this and justify that expense?
That's a great question. And a lot of people are probably saying, I can't afford this. There's no way I can invest, which is why I had mentioned the workforce development opportunity costs. They're out there. And the money is there. We just need to tap into it because the sustainability of our workforce is critical. That's the first thing. So finding other ways to pay for it that don't come out of your pocket. That could maybe even be tied to some university programs or internships, whatever that might look like. Just other people's money that are going to help you with your mission. The other thing is I like to do something that I call the CEO time audit worksheet. And that is where you are categorizing what are you doing every single day, and then classifying that by a $500 an hour task, which is what we would classify as a CEO's value of time, versus maybe a $50 an hour task for like a director of operations or HR, and then a $25 an hour task that could be either, somebody within the organization or attempt to hire. So how are you spending your time? And I bet if people really did an honest evaluation of their time, most of them are probably spending a whole lot of time in that $25 an hour category when they really shouldn't. And I say this because I was the queen of this, and I fully, self-respect or self-introspection here. I was really rigid about wanting to control the way things were done. And I would stay in my clinics and organize my materials meticulously because I wanted the books alphabetized so people could find them quickly. That was not a good use of my time, but I wouldn't let it go because it was so important to me that my technicians could find the materials quickly so they could do their job well. So my intent was great, but the time that I was spending doing it was a waste of the time. So the very first thing is, what are you spending your time on? And if you could take all of those other things that you are not really spending your time wisely on and do that in a different way, the return of your time is immensely valuable. The return of the time and the investment to your family, being able to eat dinner with your family and not be thinking about, oh my gosh, I've got payroll I have to run tonight. Being able to intently go out on a date with your partner and be present with them and investing in your relationship, your marriage, your children, your parenting. And I tell people all the time, other people's children should not get more of your time and value than your own children do. And where do I know that from? Because I'm guilty of it. So I think that the ultimate return on investment is getting your life back.
Right.
Getting your value of your time.
I love what you said at the beginning, because I think bringing visibility to this thing that's kind of nebulous, I'm burnt out. What does that mean? What does that look like? And you said, write down, do an audit of all of the things that you spend your time on. And there's something incredibly powerful, I think, about putting pen to paper and then having to look at it. And like you said, I was alphabetizing things in my clinic, right? And then there's this like aha moment of, oh yeah, I shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
And then it becomes easy to take the next step, or easier.
Right. And I think the first step of that is really committing to that, not saying, okay, yeah, I'm going to do that. And then payroll comes and you don't do it. And then there's a staff call out and you don't do it. And then there's a problem with the building and you don't do it. I mean, I'm saying commit to it for a week. What are you doing every single day? And then starting to think and shift your mindset with, is this my job? Is this a good use of my time? And is there somebody else that can do it? Now, there are some things that are always going to be your job, no matter what, 100%. But some of the other stuff, you can learn to let go. Or in my case, I had to learn that okay was better than not being done. It didn't have to be perfect. It could be okay. My standards could be a little lower, and that was okay. So I think, again, all of this comes from such a good place of intent. We want to be there and provide the best services. We want to give our teams the best tools. We want to have the best systems so their jobs are easier. But you can't do that to the detriment of your company. I said, you're personally taking 100% of the risk. And if you don't look at this, the risk is going to become your mental or your physical health. And it's going to happen quickly. And if you can't be there because you have mental or physical health issues, then it doesn't matter what you're doing because you're not helping anyone because you don't have a company anymore.
And also, whether you like it or not, you're modeling poor leadership skills to your employees.
Yeah. And really this whole culture of work, grind has become really popularized. Like, oh, I'm an entrepreneur. I work 75 hours a week. And that really shouldn't be the way that we're looking at it. We should not be kind of reinforcing that behavior. We should be reinforcing work-life balance. So I had to intentionally tell myself, do I need to respond to this email right now? Is this something that requires my immediate attention? I will still say this to this day. Does this require my immediate attention? And if the answer is no, I give myself 48 hours and come back to it. And so it's intentional.
It is, for sure. I have had to learn this as well early on in my career. I got to experience panic attacks and the reality of those. I always thought that, sorry, but this is true. I always thought they were fake. And then I had my first one and I was like, oh, these are not fake. I'm going to die. And you have to, and I had to learn how to get past that and manage it. And you said, asking yourself a question, do I have to respond to this email? One of the things that I run through in my head is I will always have fires burning. And I'm choosing that this is a fire that's going to be burning. I will never walk through this situation as an entrepreneur where all my fires are out. It just will not happen. So that can't be, I'm not going to set myself up for failure and have that expectation to begin with.
Yeah.
And then just saying, right, exactly what you said, like allow it to be okay. What's the worst? This is something that my mom always said to me. What's this going to matter in 100 years?
Yeah.
Like frame it in a way that you can walk away from it.
Right. And I think modeling that to your team, right? So if you have a BCBA that you're working with who is really stressed out because they have 5 treatment plans due at the same time, they have to give all their supervision hours in, they have a billable hours quota that they have to do, and they have all the RBT supervision due that month. You can see physically that they're stressed. You can see it in their body language. Again, they're not going to come to you and say, okay, here's my white flag. I'm stressed. I can't do my job. Approaching them and saying, I see you. It's okay. This is not an emergency. How can I help you?
Oh, and just that, like how powerful from a leadership perspective.
Right.
And how, like you just built a concrete bridge. That's incredible.
Yeah.
And then that's a great modeling for them to show. And the difference of this is how we work. So this is how I work. This is how I'm showing you that I am allowing you to work. And so you should be allowing your team to work in this way.
Yeah. And talking about boundaries and having established boundaries and expectations. So going back to the research I've been doing on the medical community and how they're trained, physicians get 10 hours of direct training in building rapport with families.
Wow.
10 hours. We've never received anything like that. And it is directly embedded into their education, their sequence. They get that as part of their education before they're even face-to-face with a client. There's an intentional path about building boundaries with families, saying, I work between the hours of 9 to 5. I don't answer email after 5 p.m. A lot of BCBAs put this unnecessary stress on themselves that if a parent emails them at 8 o'clock at night, they're going to respond. And then what do? We just reinforce that behavior and then we resent it.
Right.
So this whole theme of you can't reinforce something and then resent it, we have to break the pattern. We have to normalize failure. We have to normalize difficulty, and we have to normalize asking for help and realizing that we have our colleagues around us who really do have our back and that they want to support us. And so that comes from the top down. And when you have a strong leader that can do that, or you are that person and you are directly modeling that for your team, that is so powerful. And I used to do that in several of our meetings. I would show up and say, guys, I'm really frustrated. I have no idea what I'm supposed to do here. Let's spitball it. What can we do? Help me understand. And at first they were like, what do we do in this situation? But the more that we got through it, they're like, hey, Allie, I had this idea. What do you think about this? I'm like, awesome, run with it, right? I empowered them. I gave them the opportunity. And then what did that do? That increased the value of coming to me with questions. I was not a scary person. And then they started building their own leadership behaviors. So it doesn't have to be this like 55-hour curriculum that you do. It can just be identifying how do you build vulnerability into your team and then reinforce those behaviors of seeking help and normalizing failure.
And I think it's really hard to put a number on the return on investment of doing the work to take a culture from broken to empowering. And I think, like, how do you put a number on that? But I think what you can do is what we're doing, right? We're talking about it and then put yourself in those different environments. How do I feel in this environment A? How would I feel in this environment B? And there's all kinds of things that kind of like blossom and flower from environment B when the example you gave of working with your staff and now they're coming to me and now they're asking questions and now they feel empowered and now they're growing and they're changing. And that's almost like something that catches with people in the environment and in the company, and you almost can't put a return on it.
Right.
You know,
You
it's
could
hard.
measure retention rates. You absolutely could. Retention rates could be a key performance indicator that you are looking at. And retention rates are public. You know, there's lots of studies out there that are showing what is the average retention rate for RBTs. It's abysmal. What's the
It
average
is.
retention rate? And I think when we're talking about retention, we also need to include the differentiation between planned and unplanned. So if we know that somebody is moving and they are going to be resigning from the company, that data should not be lumped in with,
That's a different loss.
it's a different type
Yeah.
of turnover. So, intentional versus unintentional or planned and unplanned. Those need to be two separate KPIs. But retention is a way that you could also measure your return on your investment. That's another thing. So it could be the time, the retention, could be staff satisfaction surveys, and it could be client satisfaction surveys. It could be social significance surveys. It could be outcome measures. Because again, if you have a team that is doing a great job, that's going to lead to positive client outcomes, which may reduce their length of stay or how long they're enrolled in your program. Because our job is to get ourselves out of a job.
And you just listed off a bunch of things that I would wager most ABA businesses don't track. And if they do, they don't look at them on a regular basis.
Or they don't know the types of questions to ask, or they don't know how to deliver the measurement tool. Or we talk about social significance, and everyone can say, oh, that needs to be a socially significant behavior. Well, what does that really mean for the family? What does social significance look like for the family versus the client? Who is the client? What are we doing for social significance? And the example that I use all the time is if we're not making a meaningful difference in the family, what are we doing? So I think maybe even starting a conversation with families and saying, how do I know I'm making your life better? What do I need to do?
From the beginning, this family, just like you talked about with the business, you've got to know where you're going. So you've got to set your roadmap. You've got to set your North Star. With each family, you almost need to set a North Star. This family needs this. This is the mission. These are the values. This is the goals, the main goals.
And I want to just add, too, that this really applies to any type of business that you have. I know our field right now is dominated by insurance-funded outpatient ABA for children under the age of 10 primarily. But these same things matter whether you're working in a school, whether you're working with adults, whether you're doing foster care services. Anything that you're doing, you still have to follow the process. You still have to start with a business plan, because the business plan is going to go through the mission, vision, values is the very first point. If you don't know where you want to be in 3 years, it doesn't matter who you are or how many employees you have or how great your services are. If you don't know where you're going, it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping something sticks.
Yeah. So from the RBT perspective, and not just RBT, BCBA, from a turnover perspective, what are some practical things that a business owner could do to increase the likelihood of stay versus turnover?
Absolutely. So let's talk about turnover first. One of the things that's really important is when we were doing a training for some of our clients, we did some research and we found that the average cost of turnover for an RBT is like $5,100, give or take. So if we know that every single RBT that turns over in the organization is $5,000 plus, when we're looking at return on investment, we need to recoup that money. So that's real time and money. The time to train them, the time to really see them through that example or the onboarding process. And then when they leave, if they haven't made it past 90 days, that's $5,000 that just walked out the door. So really looking at what is the retention rate. So are you tracking RBT retention rate? Are you actually looking at from when they worked with a client to when they resigned the company? Because that's different than making it through training, right? If they don't make it through training, that shouldn't be included in that measure. So really looking at that's the first place and understanding the value of that. So I have some notes here that I want to go through because I think it's important that I hit on all of these, but we have developed a model that we call attain, train, and retain. I know it's a little catchy, which is why we like it. But the three processes there are very different. So you need to have a system. How are you attaining your staff? How How are you training them? And how are you retaining them? Those are three very intentional things that are directly attributable to how long you keep RBTs in the organization or any staff in the organization. So this is not just for RBTs. So when we were going through this, there are some very important things that we should be considering. The first is schedule predictability. And so depending on the model, and I'm speaking again primarily insurance-funded ABA, if you have schedule predictability for the RBTs, this is really important because this is many people, their first-time professional job. They're not making the same wage as a BCBA, and they have a family that they have to support. So they need predictability in their schedule. That's the first thing. So if they are working only afternoons in a home-based program and they don't get paid for the time that a staff member shows up for services and the client cancels or the client isn't there, people aren't going to stay for a schedule that's unpredictable, especially when they have bills to pay. So that, again, if we're looking at that respondent-operant relation there, schedule unpredictability is an establishing operation for stress and anxiety. So just knowing that you want to provide a predictable schedule when possible. That's the first thing. And that's going to look very different depending on the type of model that you have. But just knowing that is a factor that I need to consider that you're looking at and you're actively resolving. The second, which is my favorite, is supervisor presence. And so I don't know if you ever worked with BCBAs that were they were like in the golden castle on the computer in the office all day. You never saw them.
Right.
The only time you saw them was when they came in for supervision and maybe they just sat and watched you and wrote things down on a clipboard about you and you're like, what is this?
Surprisingly, those were not ever the really good ones either.
They were the ones that we were always avoiding and or the ones that covertly monitored us, were hiding behind plants and writing things down, thinking that we couldn't see them. And it's like, we see you, just tell us what you're doing, you know? And again, all of this comes from a place of good intent, right? These are these skills that weren't taught, but really defining presence, meaning you are there in the trenches with your team. Even me as the business owner, when I was carrying a caseload, I was in the trenches doing potty training with my team. I was doing safety care when needed. I was getting bitten. I was having my hair pulled. I was, sorry for the crudeness, covered in poop during potty training. I was there. My presence mattered. I was telling them, I am going to be here with you. That is extremely powerful. So intentional presence.
Especially when you're asking them to do things that are very, very difficult. To see that you're also willing does
Absolutely.
go a long way.
And that you're also willing to look at your own stuff. That's the bidirectional feedback. So when I would do supervision, I would say, you know what? I want to run that program. And what would happen is I would find out that my program was terrible. Because in my mind, I knew what I wanted it to look like, but I didn't write it in a technologically enough manner. And so it looked like a disaster. And I would run it and I would look at them and say, well, that was a disaster.
Let's try again.
I'm really sorry that I didn't do a good enough job here. That again, you know, normalizing failure, allowing vulnerability. So making sure that supervisor presence is intentional and operationally defined and reinforced in the organization is really important. Feedback channels. So I talked about bi-directional feedback. So being able to tell your supervisor, I don't like it when you provide me with verbal feedback in the moment. You make me feel like I don't know what I'm doing. Or I have a question about this target that I'm teaching. I don't understand why the prompt level in the program doesn't make sense. If it's a physical behavior, why am I using a verbal prompt? I don't understand that. And being able to talk about those types of things. And also having an anonymous way that people can provide feedback. And you can do that very easily through Google Forms or Microsoft Forms and a QR code.
That's actually such an easy, like if someone's listening to this and they're like, what's one thing that I can do that can just have an impact immediately? I think that might be it.
Yeah.
Because it's super easy to do, and I think the impact is pretty significant.
Yeah, we would have
You have
QR
nothing
codes
else in place.
that you frame and put on the wall in your clinics if you have a clinic, or you have some sort of link that you can give for people who are in home-based programs, and it's anonymous. So it's not collecting an IP address. You're not asking for their name. It's not collecting their email address, and it's just a feedback channel. But what's even more important is when you ask for feedback, you need to do something about the feedback. right? So the other thing that that directly is related to is the owner of the company should be meeting with their teams regularly. We used to do a quarterly all staff meeting. And during that, we would say, these are the initiatives of the quarter that we're going to work on as a company. So when you see these changes, here's our why. You know, Simon Sinek and Find Your Why.
Always pulling it back to
Yes.
what's the goal here. Yeah.
Yes, I encourage everyone to read that book, Find Your Why, and have everything intentional about your why. But that way, when they get comfortable giving feedback, and that feedback is something that's really hard to read, you are sending out an email or you are meeting with your team and saying, we received this feedback, we take it very personally, and as a result, we are developing an ethics committee to start looking at this. So the feedback has to be tied with intentional and swift action by the organization if they want people to continue to give feedback. How many of us have given feedback and nothing has happened? And then that we just feel like our responses don't matter. They're not listening. They don't care about what we're saying. But if I'm that person who maybe said I had an ethics concern and now there's an ethics committee, all right, I'm going to give some more feedback in the future because they're listening.
I can impact this company. I have value. Like there's all kinds of ways that then you tell yourself a story and you can see how you fit into the company, and it helps retention, I'm sure.
Yeah. Have you seen Ted Lasso? The show Ted Lasso on Apple?
Oh, I have not.
Okay.
No, but
So-
that is familiar because you're not the first person that has said something to me about it.
So my husband, Dan, asked me to watch Ted Lasso, and I was really excited that I did, although I kind of didn't in the beginning. And Ted Lasso is the type of leader that I would think that I would want all ABA business owners to be, and their leaders. One of the very first things he does is he asks all of the team players in this little box that he makes. It's like a shoe box. It's all decorated. And he says, here, give us your suggestions. And of course, all the team members are like, this is stupid. I'm not doing this. Well, then he goes and he reads it. And he says that there's a suggestion that the shower pressure was bad. So he fixed the shower pressure. He didn't tell them, I fixed the shower pressure. The team just said, he fixed the shower pressure. So then something intentional happened. That's the piece that I'm making here with this connection to Ted Lasso, is you have to be intentional. So leadership meetings, every week somebody's saying, okay, what came up in the feedback? What came up in the feedback? What's our response to the feedback? And maybe some of those things can't be done. If somebody says, okay, we want to have a vending machine in our snack room or our break room, and we want all the snacks to be free. Okay, well, maybe that can't happen, but what can you do that addresses that issue? And then you're communicating that back to your team. So that's the intentional piece. The other thing is that feedback has to be performance-based. So performance management is really important. And so what we mean by that is scorecards. Everything is pinpointed. There is clear, objective data that shows what mastery looks like. So instead of you did a great job on that trial, you performed that trial with exceptional clarity. Every SD that you issued was correct. Your prompt type was correct. That was wonderful. Keep making sure that you're doing that way in the future, right? So now we know intentionally, like we say all the time, give behavior-specific praise to our learners. Nice job clapping your hands. We should be doing the same exact thing.
Other, right.
And everything should be done through performance management. One of the biggest things I see all the time is an underperforming staff. And I say, did you do the performance diagnostic checklist or a picnic analysis to assess this behavior? What is that? So again, I'm really excited that our new task list does have performance management in it, but again, that's just a very basic piece of it. So really looking at using the science of behavior with our employees to increase performance. Also having a long-term career path. So
you know what? That one is not really talked about. It's brushed off. And there's a lot of people in our field that will say, well, it's not meant to be a long-term career path. Maybe for some people it's not, but that doesn't mean you can't build the potential paths in for the people who it could be a long-term career path for.
Right. And I think that the RBT role in particular, you're either an RBT or you're not, right? And that I can see there were several people that we worked with who never wanted to go back to school to get a master's degree to be a BCBA, but they were fantastic employees. So we had the opportunity to shift their role into something, and that was using something called job crafting, which I'll get into in just a moment. but really finding where are these people good? What do they want to do? What's important to them?
Yep.
And how can we use their time and talent in our organization that doesn't leave that ceiling of you're only going to be an RBT? Also, having levels of RBTs is important.
Yes.
Levels 1 through 4, however you want to do that, so that they know there's a clear path. I'm not just going to be an RBT making $27 an hour for the rest of my life.
It also takes the onus off the business owner to like know when and how to do raises. If you're just using a rubric and a scorecard, then you don't have to willy-nilly make decisions, which could get you in trouble anyways.
Right. You have 12 months of objective data that you can then quantify. This is where you're performing, which is great. And my experience, and I think other people would say the same, is people want to know what people have expected of them, and they want to know that they're doing a good job. Just like when we were in college and we wanted to get that A in the class, we followed the rubric. We pulled the rubric out and we followed it. The same thing is the truth here as well. People want to know that they're doing well, and if we're not defining what well looks like for them or what exceptional looks like, then that's subjective, and that doesn't really lead. It amazes me that so many ABA organizations are not using our powerful science to shape performance.
Yes.
It's so easy to do.
And when you don't have that and you don't know what is good and how to get there, that is a huge reason for burnout.
Right, because if you think you're doing a great job and you're getting no feedback, and then you do have that annual performance evaluation and you get really low scores, that you feel defeated. Why would you want to stay? And so that's why we say frequent, objective, performance-based feedback, and then that bidirectional feedback loop as well. And then, of course, the last is financial reinforcement. And that can come in many different ways. That can include, adding a benefits package to something, adding PTO. It doesn't necessarily have to be more dollars per hour or salary per year. It could be other things that are meaningful as well.
So you mentioned earlier job crafting.
Yes.
So what is that?
Yes. So this is something I'm super passionate about. And again, job crafting, looking outside of the field of ABA, what are other industries doing that we can pull from? So this is how I found job crafting. There may be some behavior analytic literature on job crafting. I did not search it, so I just want to be clear about that. So job crafting is essentially allowing your employees to define certain aspects of their job that are meaningful to them, and then allowing them to do that. So it's not saying, do you want to run a discrete trial program? There's parameters for job crafting, and I have them outlined. The first is task crafting, and task crafting is essentially adjusting how the task is performed. It's a first then contingency. Or it's when do you want to do this? It's allowing the tasks in the organization to be done in either the sequence or in a way that that person has control over. So sometimes just looking at that, when do you want to do DTT during the day can be really powerful. So that's the first piece. The second piece is relational crafting, and that is allowing them to choose the specific type of job that they want. So maybe a BCBA who really enjoys AAC devices or really wants to work in a school setting or wants to work with children between the ages of 14 and 18. Relational is where they're passionate. And the last is cognitive crafting. And that is where the shift happens, where people can start to see the outcomes of the work that they're doing. And that's something that is directly on the performance diagnostic checklist as well, is do the people see the effects of their behavior in real time? So that means instead of just taking data, do they know what that data is being taken for and what it leads to? So do they understand the connection between the work that they do and the outcomes, right? And so how I like to do that is to show all people who come to work for a company a video of a brain where a synapse is actually firing and a neuron is growing. So we're showing them this is what you're doing. So when you're saying touch duck 10 times in a row, this is what's happening, and this is why that's happening. So it's being able to directly connect the task to the outcome and the meaning of the work behind it.
That's powerful and super important. I think we do skip over that step. And a lot of times for us in the field who've been in the field, there's like this curse of knowledge where it's like, well, we know. And we don't think how important it is to be clear with someone who's coming in and doesn't know, and not just assume that they're going to make those connections themselves.
Yeah. And I would say one thing that everyone should do immediately is in their new hire training for their RBTs, find a video and show them what neuroplasticity looks like and what they're doing. That is the most powerful thing. I've heard so many people say, oh,
that light bulb moment.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's so palpable, and it's just amazing for them to see it, or to ask the question, why do you think I make you say touch duck 10 times in a row?
To have them think about it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And it's the repetition. Why do we take data the way that we do? You know, because again, if they're taking data and nothing is happening as a result of that data, if they're never seeing that outcome, that would be no different than you and I going on a diet and, you know, cutting our carbs or whatever we're doing and exercising, and we don't lose a pound. How long are we going to do that before we quit?
Yeah.
So just looking at, you know, some of the correlations to real life with this, and showing the reason. And again, what does that all tie back to? The why, the mission, vision, and values of the company.
Yep.
And the leadership.
And the leadership, which is so important to craft that environment where people want to stay, to reduce turnover, keep that money in the company to be able to grow instead of lighting it on fire, help more kids, train more techs. And it's just more fun to work in an environment where everything's firing on all cylinders, I think.
Well, and I think, you know, when we're looking at it again from the OBM or the behavioral principles, these are all interlocking behavioral contingencies. And so what people typically will do is they will look at one problem and they will try to solve one problem in isolation without realizing these interlocking contingencies and how they are very interdependent. And so if you're not doing this, this will happen. If you're not including this, this person won't understand. So really taking a look at it from more of a macro level and saying, what are these interlocking dependent contingencies or behavioral contingencies that I need to consider, instead of just looking at retention and only targeting retention? Because if we're not looking at retention to the leadership, to the feedback, to the values, we're missing the boat. And then all of that is just it's not a good use of anyone's time. Going back to the $50, $500, or $25 an hour thing, you know, you're spending all your time solving a problem that you're really not able to solve. And you really should be looking at the big picture and solving the big problem as a whole. And so looking at it from that lens can be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dr. Allie, thank you so much for talking with me. I think this was incredibly valuable. Is there anything else that you would want to say or leave with owners? I think as we've kind of talked through so much of importance of leadership, the problem that we have in our field, how to address it, which is the how is multifaceted and, like you said, interconnected. And then once we've solved for that, what other pieces to make sure that we're keeping the staff, and what are we tracking to make sure that we're giving them the tools that they need? And all of that, is there anything we're missing?
Yeah. So one important consideration, there is a burnout inventory called the MBI. I always say it wrong. I always call it Malash burnout, but I think it's actually something different. That can be a staff retention tool that you're using for data. So on a quarterly basis, maybe running that MBI with your team, that could very easily be turned into, again, a Google or a Microsoft form.
Just a simple data point, like quarterly, is that what you said?
I would recommend quarterly, because you don't want to wait a year and people are burned out. But then when you can see what are the specific things that they are reporting, now that becomes part of an assessment that you can then look and see, what in the environment do I need to change? So I think if we're not looking at, and that's again, that post that I saw on Facebook about, I'm so burned out. A lot of people don't know about this MBI, and that's just one. There's several of them. And the MBI, anyone can go Google right now and download it for free. There's no paywall behind it.
We do these assessments with our clients. This was something I was thinking as I was building the data collection for ABA Engine, and having that same thing on the employee side. So we have the same tools, not exactly the same, but the same kind of idea, right? Which is what we're talking about, where what are the assessment measures
Mm-hmm.
for staff? And then you talked earlier about giving staff the ability to say, hey, these are my goals. What is my career path, goals? What do I want out of this job? What do I want out of, and how is this job going to help me get to my career goals? And then what are the right behaviors and things that we need to track to create empowerment so our staff stay? And sometimes, what are the behaviors we have to track to decrease too?
Yes.
But having those on both sides, the client side and the employee side, and we have the science, we know how to do it.
Yeah. And think about how you would feel as an employee if you were working for an ABA company, you're a BCBA in an ABA company, and your boss pulls you aside and says, I want you to fill out this burnout inventory because you matter to me, and I want to make sure that you're doing okay. And if there's anything the company can do to support you better, we're aware of it.
Right.
That just immediately signals psychological safety and that you are saying, okay, I want to work for this company. They care about me. But then again, there has to be the action on it. So it has to include the action piece. So if there is an area that's really low, that there is maybe even a referral to an employee assistance program. Those are cheap. People can get those so cheap and they're not using them. Or if it's something that can be coached and trained behavior analytically or professionally or from a leadership perspective, that happens. Not just that they fill it out and, okay, I'll see you again in 3 months. So there has to be intentional action. But I would want to work for a company. So a lot of people say to us, how can I compete in these environments with these private equity companies who are paying people $150,000 a year?
You can. You create the environment.
Correct.
Absolutely.
I would go work for somebody who sat down with me and went through an MBI and then helped me over $150,000 right out of school, 100%. And I would stay with them because I felt like they were invested in me.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I would work hard for them because I cared about that investment.
Yeah. So this is so much information, and I am guessing that our audience wants to know more and likely would want some mentorship and support navigating through all of this. So for those people who are interested in taking the next step, how could they get in touch with you?
Sure, absolutely. They could reach out to us on our website. It's www.abagrowthteam.com. And there is an opportunity for them to book a free consultation, and that typically happens with my husband, Dan. But we would be happy to help anyone that we can and share this knowledge and get this out into the field.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr.
Thanks.
Alley.